Good late Tuesday, early Wednesday. Meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now. Give you a look at those temperatures across the region at this late hour. You see how nice it is out there, really, in terms of these temperatures. I know it was, very cool that Monday morning. Some rural areas, including where we're at, getting all the way down into the mid 50s. Now, right now, it used to start at about 2 a.m. this Wednesday morning. We're sitting at 62 degrees, so maybe getting in the upper 50s here before, that sunrise occurs. But we'll just kind of watch here. We'll kind of track things in terms of all that. I know we still kind of have that pattern here where we're having that coastal flood advisory in play to award the St. Johns River Basin. I know we also have some recurrent concerns as well, that northeasterly type of wind here. Just the overall pattern has been causing some of those issues here. You kind of see it with the arrows. Some of this a little more easterly at times, but you kind of get the idea. Definitely, impacts around times of high tide there toward the St. Johns River Basin, maybe a foot and a half above normally dry ground there. So just some nuisance tidal flooding, maybe a road closure or two. It's kind of odd, talking about that with this little rain that we've seen here lately. We don't want to be getting too far out from, rainfall in parts of our area. Eventually, we'll have to start having some drought concerns here again that we'll have to be on the lookout for. It's kind of a give and take. Some areas here, can use the rain. Other areas don't really need it. Coastal flooding here, again, we had the issue, with that here, and we're continuing to have that, and it's something, though, that we're watching towards some of those zones there. It's not that big of a deal, but again, it really hadn't rained much. It's just because of the overall pattern here. As we're tracking things stand pretty calm overall, which is what we like to see. So again, not too big of a deal, but definitely, something that we're on the lookout for here. We have that recurrent risk, as I was alluding to here. It's been alluding to. We do have some showers and storms down off of east central and southeast Florida here as we're looking down that way. It is warmer down there as we're tracking things, as we're monitoring things here. Try to see how much of that can kind of get a little bit further north. You see, though, it's in the lower 80s, even around like Patrick Air Force Base there, Melbourne International Airport. You kind of get the idea, but just kind of giving you guys an idea of what's going on here meteorologically. Again, a situation here where it's been, fairly calm. Had some breezy conditions, some of those coastal areas here. That's something folks have been on the lookout for. But again, this is much better than having anything tropical to worry about out there, which obviously, not having that around is great news here. As we're looking as we're tracking things, I know that thunderstorm risk on your Wednesday do have a chance, maybe an isolated one in our southern areas and our far northwestern areas, but it's not a big chance, but just in case. Only 20% is where I'm putting a rain chance overall, so yeah, not too concerned. We have an area, the coastal low up toward the mid-Atlantic there, that's been causing some issues up that way, some concerns. We have a risk of severe weather out toward parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas Panhandle, and New Mexico, Colorado. You see that a little bit, Oklahoma Panhandle, a little bit higher out in that yellow zone, which in this area is a green zone, which indicates a small tornado risk even. Some of these areas involved there, pretty rural for the most part. Few, bigger towns, but not too noteworthy there. In general, I know on Sunday we did have a noteworthy tornado risk set up in north parts of North Dakota. We retweeted some things there from the National Weather Service tornado Twitter/X account. So it's something noteworthy. You see some thunderstorm acts in there right now in parts of northern Kansas, southern Nebraska. I know in New Mexico there's a flash flood emergency right now that's worth noting. I know that wasn't planned, so they have downgraded this to a considerable one here just the last little bit, but still life-threatening there in some of these spots. So, life-threatening flash flooding there. I know danger level still in play, but some of the water levels much lower than late July floods out there, for instance, according to the Weather Service in El Paso. So, again, that's kind of a storyline as we look out there. In the Pacific, some acts and nothing of, major note right now. We'll watch it, though, and then See if it has any influence in the Atlantic eventually, or the Gulf, or something like that. But as we look out toward the Atlantic itself, it looks like we'll have a system get named very soon, and that would become Gabrielle. But it's been very quiet out here in the Atlantic, very quiet. Haven't had a named system all month here in September, the most active month really in hurricane season over the years. So it's, something that we're, it's surprising to see, but that's probably about to change in a way. But you see the forecast models right now taking this off toward the north eventually, maybe around Bermuda. So way to the east of the U.S. as of now. Still watching in case the pattern shifts dramatically, but right now things are looking, very good here toward the East Coast, in terms of, it's not looking like we'd have any type of impacts or direct, maybe some marine impacts like what we had with Aaron. We'll see, but this looks like it might not be as bad as that one was even in the basin. But again, not a big deal overall as we're tracking things at this moment. So that's the good news. Again, we've had those, winds here, the coastal flood advisory that I was alluding to. That's something that we're just, kind of monitoring here. Again, even though it hadn't been all that wet in terms of rainfall, again, definitely this overall pattern here can cause issues. It might be a little bit surprising in some ways here to some folks, so just keep that in mind. Again, not overly concerning, but still you have to take into account when there's coastal flood advisory in play. Let's do that Wednesday here. St. John's River Basin and its tributaries as we're looking there. So again, it's just something that, is been dry. We do, some areas may need some rain, but some areas around there don't really want that rain because, they're having the other issues here from the overall meteorological patterns. So that's kind of storyline there. I know, of course, last year at this time, we weren't too far off from having Helene be a disastrous story in the picture. Now, as we look at the graphics right now, Gabrielle, the next name, has been very quiet recently. Going to pick up some, but nothing really, of overwhelming concern right now, which is great news. Things can change quick, but your next names here on the list, Gabrielle, Umberto, Imelda, Jerry, Karen, you kind of get the idea. Lorenzo, Melissa there, the way we've been going so far, may not even get that far, but things can change just all of a sudden here. So remain alert as we still, for about another 3 to 4 weeks are in that peak of hurricane season. So just be very mindful of that here. Even though we had the peak already, the top part of that, we're still pretty high up there, and we've had plenty of storms here that have been destructive. From through about probably about October 10th. We had some even after that, of course, but October 10th, this is the overall pattern here. We've had some of the worst ones there in early October here lately. Matthew, Michael, Milton, so I don't know if we'd get all the way to Melissa this year as the pattern with all the M's. It would honestly be kind of surprising probably to get the M that quick at this point, unless we really get a bunch of systems with some of them not being a big deal. So we'll see, but you can't, remember Michael back in 2018, it's all of a sudden, things changed in the model. And I remember looking at the European model, and it just, that Sunday morning and night there after all the football games, college Saturday, things just all of a sudden took that turn where it looked just awful. Model were kind of not sure what was going to happen, and then they locked in on it. And it was one of the worst disasters in U.S. history, Florida history, in terms of the hurricane, with Michael Cat 5 on that fateful October 10th, 2018, there on Panama City and those areas there, Tyndall Air Force Base there, Mexico Beach. You kind of get the idea. So you got to just be very mindful of what can happen. Of course, in terms of the worst tropical cyclone by county since 1950, my analysis of things, you see Matthew, that was an October storm. Michael obviously was an October storm as well. Helene was, a storm that hit about a week from now last year, so almost that 1 year anniversary coming on up. Kate was a November storm, which, that storm is just still mind-boggling. I know we had Nicole not that long ago, but Kate was even worse than that. It's still the worst cyclone, tropical cyclone here to hit, about 5 of our counties there since, we started having these storm systems named in 1950. So, that is remarkable, and not in a great way. Kate is one to still remember. Now, if Helene would have been just a little west, it would have not been, Kate anymore, and Leon, or even McCullough, or even Franklin. As some of the tracks there from the Hurricane Center for a while had this, obviously being that storm of record for those areas instead, and we might have seen a situation where Idalia would have stayed on this map for some of these areas, but instead went closer to where Idalia hit, not the same exact, but very close, and it kind of just replaced, and went, a few steps further than Idalia, which was already really, really bad and very noteworthy. I mean, both of them required presidential visits there, obviously, and the like. They were a big deal, Idalia and Helene both. So, as you can kind of see, Alberto, that was a July storm. Dora was, one in September, that peak of hurricane season, like Irma, by the same time. We just said those anniversaries here. So, yeah, just remain alert. I know Easy David, he just passed those anniversaries a couple weeks ago. So, it's just a situation here where we still have, with, Helene, of course, coming up soon, but then Michael, Kate, Matthew, all those anniversaries are pretty far down the line here. It's not looking likely we'd have something, significant next week or so toward our area, based on the models, but doesn't mean we couldn't have something in 2 or 3 weeks, Don't really know at this point. Not saying that there's something exactly out there in the modeling, but my point is we had Michael October 10th, Matthew by the same time. Kate was, mid-November. I mean, almost Thanksgiving. It's that time frame where the people were still picking up the pieces. I mean, people were picking up the pieces from Hurricane Kate a while after that anniversary, that 40th anniversary coming up in November. So, again, just kind of crazy to think about here as we're tracking things with all of this. And let's look back at Helene here with that 1 year anniversary coming up. Need to make sure we talk about it a lot here with that, anniversary coming up with not much out there. That Category 4 storm was one of the country's most impactful ever, and it was very bad for our area, but it was, in terms of the human toll, the death toll tragically was even worse in western North Carolina. But in our area, it was still one of the worst ever, and the worst in terms of since at least 1950 for about 20 some odd of our counties there. So I think it was 23 to that. I have it at 23, I'll back it up here. At 23 of our counties, it was the worst one, since we started naming storms, in 1950. That is bad, obviously. And because it didn't hit right in the biggest metros like Tallahassee or Jacksonville, which is good in terms of, it was, a situation where it would have been, in terms of population density, in terms of, more homes and the like, and, in terms of the efforts to clean up things they would have been hindered. Everything would have been worse. It would have had a bigger area, sure, but it didn't get as much attention, especially hitting on a Thursday into a Friday, and then there's football, and North Carolina was even worse, and it kind of, the attention kind of waned here, but it was still bad, and still people are still picking up the pieces from those two, Idalia and Helene, and even Debbie to some degree, but especially Idalia and Helene. It's just unbelievable we have a storm like this hitting that area. 939 millibars with the pressure. We hadn't had a storm anything like Idalia even, really going back, and then we had something way, higher in terms of the winds, quite a bit lower in terms of the pressure with Helene. I mean, I think Idalia is 115, but 140 is quite a bit higher in terms of the values there, in terms of proportionally. It's kind of like, not exactly, but, an earthquake, a certain magnitude going a little higher is actually a good bit higher if you look at it. So, I mean, this is something, we're talking about, like, and I mean, of course, it's a Cat 4 on that Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. I'll go ahead and throw that on up here real quick for everybody at home, just to kind of give you guys an idea about all that. So let me just remind you guys of what that looks like. The background there is Mexico, or check that. That was the background there at Tyndall Air Force Base after Hurricane Michael and that Cat 5 hurricane. But this was still a catastrophic storm in our area in terms of the wind and the surge, that storm surge. Obviously, so impactful. But I mean, let's compare it to a tornado. It's not exactly the same, but I mean, you're talking about the difference. Like you have 2 type winds or you have 3. So, it was even like if it was just a tornado, which this was over a bigger area with some of the worst winds, not, extremely bigger with the highest, but just severe damage, obviously, even if that's coming through real quick. So that kind of tells that story, obviously, as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things here in toward the weather center. So, again, definitely worth noting, obviously, in a very significant way. I mean, it's something that, again, I feel like, it's something we haven't maybe even talked about it much after we talked about Adalia so much in the aftermath. Helene just kind of was the one that, some folks just weren't able to recover, and it wasn't an area where it hit the biggest towns, with the worst of the impacts. I mean, sure, right off to Lake City, but it wasn't Tallahassee, Gainesville, Jacksonville, and it didn't get as much attention. So with it already being bad there, not fixed, it just makes it worse. It kind of gets lost in the shuffle between it happening late in the week, and then, it happening, even worse with some of these impacts up further north. I mean, Georgia, we had some even out of our area, the Augusta TV market. I know I broke this down at one point, but the Augusta TV market had a bunch of fatalities, and it was even way worse though in the Greenville, South Carolina / Asheville, North Carolina TV market. With all that flooding, so it's crazy that they actually, our markets didn't even have as many fatalities from Helene here, our TV market areas, compared to up north. I mean, it was quite a bit worse up there, and this is still a storm of record, still very, very impactful, and we can never lose sight of that. I mean, Cedar Key wasn't even the worst storm, it's going back to 1950. Maybe if you just say 51 on, yeah, but, I mean, it was still really bad, though. Hurricane Easy in 50, a little worse based on, certain factors, but, it's a broad brush. Of course, some parts of the county, Levy, maybe it was worse at the coast, Helene, but then inland, Hurricane Easy in 1950 might have been worse with, 50 inches or so of rain. But you see Helene there after, that storm system impacted Cedar Key. That it wasn't even the worst of it, though. It was quite a bit worse up the coast, even though Cedar Key had over 9 feet of surge, and we're talking about, a double-digit type of surge numbers, well into those up the coast there. Dixie County, Levy County with just major, major problems. Obviously they're not, a huge population at those areas, and they were already hit hard by Adalia, but still, you saw Adalia there real quick, 6-something feet. There's former record for a while in that frame. Not, don't go back to 50 with this information, but you see here then Helene just jumped all over it. And then you see here storm surge. I mean, you see how it's way over people's heads when you're talking even a few feet. I mean, it can be a problem for children, obviously. Even 6 inches of flowing water can knock an adult down. So when you're talking about 9 feet, that's why we emphasize evacuate for those areas. And that's why, everybody in the media and the weather service and just, really said that. And that's why the toll was minimized around here. But it was a harder message for up further north, and sadly we had so many fatalities, people not expecting maybe that flooding to be as bad, in areas that hadn't flooded in so long like that, from a storm hitting down here and it being so bad up in western North Carolina with all the flooding. It wasn't surge, but it was just rivers, just everything falling apart, to be quite honest here, and everything coming into these communities. But as we go ahead and look here, and toward Taylor County, you just see the devastation. You have wind, you have surge, you have all these different factors. Some areas, the coast, of course, some of the wind, but, I would say a lot of this really that surge coming on in here as you're tracking things, that water, when you're in these areas, it's a pile. And some of these areas are, doing better. Some areas are, still sadly, in bad shape. So, as we go ahead and go there, looking more there, Taylor County, just awful. This is after the storm system, right after some imagery from NOAA. Now Stark, even though this wasn't our storm of record, it wasn't as bad as Irma, wasn't, near as bad as Dora. We didn't even lose power here, except for the power just flickering because of this. We had to start our streams back because our backup system wasn't quite catching up there, right? But the point is, 989.7 millibars there. You can see a situation here where this was the lowest pressure in the recent systems. Milton 1,000, Adalia 997, Nicole 997. I know we were in the 970s during Irma. Dora there, I had looked at it when I did my research, but it was worse in terms of that pressure even here. Then Irma was Dora But, these are just from my weather station. I didn't have this particular Davis weather station when we had Irma. I had another one which was measured in 970s, but this one's very, accurate here, very aligned. But Irma was still 970s, probably around 975 is what I had, if I remember right. And that's about right based on what I've looked at here on some different ones, which, that lower equals stronger, equals worse generally. So you can kind of get an idea with all that. Even though Adalia, Nicole, Milton, there's, had different period impacts. Helene, in the recent ones, was the worst, but, for Stark. But, Nicole, that was an interesting one because I hit in November, and I know we had a lot of that wind coming from the east there for a while. And if I look back, my weather station's not that high up, but I'll have to double check this, but I believe Nicole still holds the record for the highest wind gust on my other states. And even though I would say Helene's winds just in general worse, by a good, good margin, a big margin really, as we're tracking things. But I know Helene, the highest gust I had with it was only 38, which sounds weird because obviously, it's a situation here where we had much higher than that, but on mine at a certain height, it was actually slightly higher where it was last year in that position, I believe. Let me double check. It might have actually, maybe it was about the same still at that point, but, peak gust at 38 at 11:16 on that Thursday night here. So right after it made landfall within Nicole, but somehow, because it depends on where your trees are and stuff too in open areas. But Nicole actually in 2022, I had a couple gusts there getting, up there even a little bit higher. I know 42 miles an hour from the east on the 10th there in November 2022. So kind of, again, higher gusts, I'm sure, if you measure higher up and with it's still good equipment, but it's not going to be on some of those winds. It's really not easy to get a measure on. But my point is, Helene was definitely the strongest meteorological feature we've had around here in a long time. We had some severe weather makers get down in the 990s, but since I've had this weather station, we never had anything in the 980s here like Helene. So you see, after Helene there, some of that damage there around Stark. Again, we're coming up on that 1 year anniversary next week. It still wasn't even that bad here, even though some folks without power for a while. Some neighborhoods, some trees, it still impacts people on a hyper-local level. Worse here, sure. I'm not trying to, downplay it, but Irma was a lot worse, and then Dora was a good bit worse than that. So, it's kind of crazy to even think about it like that, when you're looking at things and when you're tracking things. That this was just impactful. Irma was a lot more impactful. Dora was a good bit more impactful. And you can actually, in worst case scenarios, Dora was a 2 when it hit, high end 2, and it was, 2 to a 1 when it was coming across Bradford right there with the center. But, in the worst case scenario, I don't have the graphic in here, but Mariana after Michael, they had their worst case scenario. They had pretty much a wind gust, I believe it was to Cat 3. As I recall, I have it up. Let me see my pull my show on the other system real quick. So I was pulling some graphics out of it. I won't switch it over. But yeah, Mariana had a gust to 102, not 115. But they had impacts there where it was a Cat 5 hidden. If of course speed, that moves quicker in, about 50 miles inland. Their damage was bad there from Michael, and that's about our worst case scenario. What they had in Mariana after Michael, and I think it might have been a Cat 3 in the Georgia officially. So I'm saying it was a major hurricane impact in Mariana, and that theoretically can happen here. The speed of a hurricane, if it's moving slower, it may, wind down a little more, or if it's moving faster, you could have a Cat 3 impact here in Bradford. We had a 1 to a 2 in our worst case, and since they've been naming the storms, and that was really bad still with Dora, which is Irma was really bad. So I'm saying it could still be quite a bit worse than what we've seen, and in all of our, going back since people, nobody's seen the impacts of stuff as we go back in the 1800s. We had some that were worse. So I know Mariana now, sometimes you have to look at resources, but 2 weeks after, nearly 50% were without power in Jackson County. Since then, I think the hurricane power outage restoration process has had to be, because it's been so bad, and it has obviously been very much so refined here in Florida because we had so many of them. Things seem to go a lot quicker now than that. But it just goes to show that we could have something far, far, far worse than Helene and Bradford County specifically, and even a good bit worse than Irma and worse than Dora. So, as you see here, Hamptons was an area where I believe they were probably still without power when I took this, going there a couple days afterwards. So, something to kind of keep in mind there for sure as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things. Again, the anniversary coming on up here soon as we're looking here and as we're giving you guys the very latest on all of this. So, now, of course, up there in North Carolina, we had so many phosphate emergencies emerge, and it was just a catastrophe. And the track shifted closer to Augusta versus Macon. They had a lot of fatalities from trees just falling on homes, and the like in the middle of the night. Track shift there, inland is moving so quick. Maybe some folks, they knew something was coming, but they didn't realize just how bad it was going to be. You think of mobile homes, you think of trees in the middle of the night. Not a good combination. This is on that 27th around 5 in the morning. As we're looking at that on that September 27th of last year, you see all these red ones. Those are indicative, or maroon, I guess I should say, polygons, flood or flash flood warnings with the considerable, and in some cases even the catastrophic tag. Just everywhere, and it kept getting worse and worse. Even in the hours after, it doesn't look that bad on here in a way. At this point in time, but they're already getting on antecedent rainfall, getting more here, and then got even more. And, right down there near Jefferson and Burke County, Georgia, is where you had some of that center circulation, close to Augusta, where they're having people, with that wind just coming on in. People were tragically getting hurt and getting killed there. Supposed to go a little bit further over toward Macon and Atlanta with that center and went east. And then you had all that rain, and this, already had the alerts, and it got heavier and heavier rain. And we know what happened next with, dozens and dozens of people, losing their life here from the hurricane, depending on, just with the, numbers were just astronomical. The official numbers, varied some, but just, many dozens of people losing their life because of Helene. And then you see the next 7 days, as we respect to current weather, your next 7 days, rainfall forecast not looking too bad, though. South Florida still getting a good bit there toward, Miami and West Palm and the like there. Even Melbourne getting into a good bit as we're looking. We see up toward like Stark, maybe a quarter inch on average. It's not too big of a deal overall. I know did have some alerts looking back toward Miami, some sort of thunderstorm warnings recently popping up there. So we're looking back, on those days here this week, looking back, for instance, on that Tuesday. I know we're keeping our eyes on some of that down that way. Definitely, worth noting, obviously, as we were keeping an eye on the Doppler there, Miami-Dade, Broward counties, but not anywhere close, obviously, to our area. I know you can go to carter.com/radar for an interactive look at things. Now, FSU's playing at home Saturday. Weather, not looking too bad for that. It's a 3:30 kick there. We'll watch to see if there's any rain chances in there. Temperatures will start to be increasing some, but not as bad as that game in terms of the heat, I wouldn't think, as what we had, when FSU was playing there against East Texas A&M. I think that's what it was. I can't hardly remember at this point because that was such an easy game for FSU. Yeah, East Texas A&M. I think that's who we played. Yeah, Texas A&M University Commerce there. And it was hotter for that one. I know Florida, they'll be down in South Florida. It's up to watch the weather. ESPN College Game Day going down there. Of course, Lee Course is retired now, but still, some folks still watching that. And then as we're looking here, it's a situation where, the Saturday primetime game will be Florida against Miami. So we'll have to see what the weather is down there. They had a delay in the USF game last week. That Miami won very wide margin. I know the Florida game there, downstate was not the only one delayed. South Florida, Miami, we also had some big games, CBS game, Fox game were all delayed all at the same time. In addition to that CW game, which is probably the biggest of the three. But my point being, we'll watch the weather for different things. We'll have to watch the weather for the Jacksonville Jaguar game on Sunday, even the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game on Sunday down there in Raymond James Stadium there against, I believe it's the New York Jets they're playing this week. Tampa's 2-0. Jacksonville, unfortunately, going to 1-1. That Cincinnati game was a mess, to be quite honest. They're up there in Southern Ohio as looking and tracking things there for sure. So again, let's go ahead and just kind of keep watching things, keep tracking them. Of course, again, we have the interactive radar available. Got some fog potential, watch that, so just be careful there. Got to watch out. Some pockets of hazardous driving conditions due to low visibility are possible. Hopefully not a widespread thing, but just make sure you're slowing down and giving yourself extra time to reach your destination. Make sure your vehicle is as visible as possible to other vehicles by using your low beam headlights when this fog is present, of course. Still, you have to have your lights on at night. But, it's really, you got to be extra careful when you have the fog around and leave plenty of room between you and the vehicle in front of you. So, important stuff to keep in mind. Now, in terms of that college football playoff, we're just alluding to some of these games here. Miami's going to play Florida. Florida looked terrible. And Baton Rouge, just, so many interceptions there. OSC didn't look all that good either, to be quite honest. Their offense, they had trouble against Louisiana Tech, and they had, trouble against Florida. But, when you have 5 interceptions on the other side, it's kind of hard to lose at home. So I don't think much of LSU, as most people are having way higher than I do, but just not really sure about them. They're number 9, and I honestly, Clemson looked terrible against Georgia Tech. It's hard. They both, LSU and Georgia Tech, beat them. It's hard to kind of weigh those in some ways because I'm just not sure about LSU. Their press conference after the game there Saturday night even, they didn't seem very confident. Let's just say that coach there at LSU didn't seem very confident. It's not what you expect there. Really, if you really had a good team, it's just something there where, you'd be talking in a different way. So I actually had him at number 8 before I watched that press conference. That's not something I normally do, but I moved him down to number 9. Just I don't know. It just hadn't. I feel like LSU is going to lose multiple games. Doesn't mean they couldn't still make the playoff out of the SEC, but I think there's something. I don't think it's working out for them. But anyway, Miami had them at number 1. That's a big headline here. You can see the ACC champion. What a great job there that Mario Cristobal's done. I know if they're in a close game, though, they might, that's not one against a brand new quarterback like Notre Dame, of course, but they have one like, remember what happened with Georgia Tech a couple years ago. It might not work out so well for Miami, but if they can, really win like they did against USF and keep that going, they could win the national championship. Ohio State's number 2. I have them as the Big Ten champion there. That big one against Texas. Now, Texas has looked terrible lately, quite honestly, but, still keeping them at number 2, in quarterback there. And they had a little trouble for a little while against the Ohio University Bobcats, but they pulled away in late. Oregon, number 3. I know they kind of, they had that game there in Northwestern, at Northwestern there, kind of right by the lake there, Lake Michigan. And, it took a little while to wake up in that one, but they did, and they're number 3. Georgia's the SEC champ based on what I see right now. Of course, you never know with these. These are just projections, but I have them at number 4. I know, they really got lucky on that Tennessee game on the road, though. You got to give them some credit for that. Their defense wasn't all that good, and they very well may not, be that SEC champion. But, you got to give them a little bit of credit for winning on the road there. Tennessee, that's not an easy environment. And they did get the job done. Penn State, I dropped them to number 5. They struggled for a while against Villanova, but eventually they ended up, figuring that out and winning by a wide margin. FSU didn't play last week. They were on a bye. A pretty easy team, it looks like. Cross your fingers, because we said that in 2023 against North Alabama. We all know what happened with injury to Jordan Travis, but FSU's up to number 6 in my rankings. Iowa State number 7. They struggled there. That Iowa State against Arkansas State there in Jonesboro, Arkansas. But that's not an easy place to play. But they got the job done. They're the Big 12 champ. But Georgia Tech, I mean, how great that was to beat, for them, Dabo Swinney, Haynes Keene, and that offense. I've really been high on Georgia Tech compared to others. I still thought Clemson was going to win that game, though. I thought Clemson was still going to win that one there because, Dabo Swinney backs against the wall, but it didn't happen, and now Clemson probably has to win out to maybe get to the college football playoff, trying to win that conference. I mean, there's teams in the ACC like California that have very easy schedules, unbelievably easy, like they don't really play anybody ranked, I don't think. I'll have to double check, but, there's a chance they could finish undefeated and might not even be that good. And that means a team like Clemson or one of the other ACC teams, FSU, whoever might end up being, get left out of that. It might help depending on who, or could hurt depending on where you're at with the rankings and the like. So you just never know here with some of these schedules and unbalanced, formula here at this point. I mean, it's just kind of crazy how things go with all that. I mean, some years teams play a lot tougher schedule, but it's just kind of how it goes sometimes here with, different formulas and the like here, how things play on out. So just something to keep an eye on here as we're tracking things. And Georgia Tech has, they play Clemson and they play Georgia non-conference, but their schedule is one where they, they're actually a better team, based on what they've proved so far, maybe than California, that's not even up here, but I just couldn't believe how, I don't think they played one ranked team all year, California, and, it's kind of a weird thing when you look at that. So the Golden Bears there, in football, they could finish undefeated, and it's not like FSU when we actually had teams like LSU, we were playing there in Orlando, the Heisman winner beating them by 3 touchdowns, or, going into Gainesville with our second stringer winning, pulling away at the end. And we weren't doing good at the beginning, but pulling away at the end. And then just all those great wins in between there. I mean, going to Clemson, that dramatic game there in overtime. Cade Klubnik, the 2-time ACC champion, going into their place, winning that game in 2023. That's, all that, plus the other games in there, should have been enough to get us, to that college football playoff. I mean, especially with Alabama struggling against South Florida, losing, against Texas there, by double digits. It was 10 points, I think, at home. I mean, you look back at FSU's schedule there in 2023, they had just some of those great victories there. I mean, they dominated against Syracuse, winning by 38 points, going to Winston-Salem against Wake Forest, winning there, by multiple touchdowns. I mean, winning that game by 25 points, beating Duke by, that was a team with Riley Leonard. I mean, he got hurt in that one, but FSU beat them by 18 points. They went up to Pittsburgh, a tough place to play, especially in November, beat them by 17 points, beat the rival by 7, Miami, though that game, points, it was one where FSU, was doing maybe better at points, but, the points Miami did, try to make that comeback there. So, FSU won an ACC title game by double digits, and it still wasn't enough to put them in the playoffs. But anyway, I do not think, as of now, based on where I have these teams ranked, even though FSU will be playing Miami at home, I do think Miami, I'm a big FSU fan, but subjectively here, and really, just not even that, and let's just say, based on analysis here, based on what I'm seeing from the teams, I do think Miami still is a good bit better than FSU this year, and even on the road, I think Miami would probably get the better of FSU, maybe not, and if not, then that really helps FSU, for a while there, though Miami could, might be a situation where FSU gets to be on a bye, or something like that, but then they circle back around, and then, if they play again in Miami, I think Miami is a good base. The way they beat USF was really impressive. That's why Miami number 1. Texas Archman, and I don't know what's going on there. That's stunning to see. They were really struggling against Texas El Paso there for a while. Illinois, I put them in there now. I had TCU, but they only won by 3 touchdowns against Abilene Christian. They're not even FBS. So, not as, I was basing a lot off that UNC game, but they can move back in there. USF lost by a lot to Miami, but they're number one in my assessment. They were going on the road. They already beat two ranked teams. Tulane, is right on the edge, and it could be between them for the American, which would be for this last spot, because USF is not number 12. Even though they're 12 on here, last week they were 11. They were really number 11 in my rankings. This week they're 12, but they're not really number 12. It's just their last playoff spot. That's just how it works with the seeding and the criteria, because you have to have 5 conference champs. But you see TCU, and then Utah, Texas Tech, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. A lot of people have Texas A&M just moving way up after beating Notre Dame. They very well could, really, make progress here, and they may be better than LSU in Texas here, in Georgia even. Who knows? But they haven't seen enough on the field yet. Oklahoma, their quarterback, pretty strong there. They beat Michigan, but they were enough, or let's say Michigan did so much against Central Michigan, I think it was, that it made me think Michigan may be slightly better than I thought. So that maybe put Oklahoma at least in. They beat Temple by a good margin on the road. So that maybe at least put them in here in teams under consideration, but not quite good enough yet. But this is not like the end of the season where there's a lot of data. We're kind of just it's really iffy at this point. Who knows? I mean, this could be completely different, maybe except for a handful of teams by the time we get into December. I mean, a team like Oregon. I'm not nobody's lock, of course, but a team like Oregon seems like a pretty safe one to probably think would be in here. You have to have pretty much a Big 12 champion in here somewhere. I don't know, it may probably be one of these 4 that I have on here. And then, but you just never know. I mean, Miami seems like a team. They've never won the ACC. I mean, just what they played against USF was incredible. I mean, they're a rival of FSU, but just like Florida is, but we got to give them credit where credit's due. I mean, they were really, really, really impressive. And, even if FSU, comes close, of course we want to win, in that big game in October. And you can't look past Virginia, for instance, on a Friday night the week before. That could be a very, tricky trap game. But if FSU gets past that, then even if they come close against Miami, unless they're just completely, dominated by Miami, then FSU, is still a team where they shouldn't really move into rankings. If they can somehow beat Miami, the way Miami's been playing, if they keep playing the way they do, then, I mean, you could consider FSU maybe a team, depending on how Miami and FSU play over the next few weeks. I mean, it's kind of remarkable. I don't know how I'm even saying this off of 2 games, and I may need to, kind of maybe reduce my expectations a little bit, but I mean, you can make a case for FSU all the way at number 1 if they could beat Miami, if Miami keeps playing the way they've been playing, but there's a long way to go. Nobody's looked perfect. Miami's probably looked the best. Oregon, you can make an argument they looked better than Ohio State, but that win against Texas enough to keep them ahead of them for now, so we shall see. Just continue to look at things here. By the way, I see I have different alert stuff coming up on my system. There was an earthquake off toward Alaska. This came up in my alert system. Let me look at this here just to make sure everything's good. It looks like they're not going to issue any type of tsunami warning now, which is good. But 4.6 earthquake 100 miles south of Kodiak City, Alaska. Tsunami not expected. So I just want to give you that. That just came up in the tsunami alert. So I want to make sure you guys heard about that. But okay, so now your planning forecast there. A 20% chance of rain on that Wednesday, 20% on that Thursday. So not too high, but southern counties could get a thunderstorm. It's not impossible. So just, but Orlando, Tampa, further south, the rain chances are a bit higher down there, or more humidity, and, a lot less humidity, feeling better up here, which is what we like to see. 64 degrees for that low, but some areas, the beaches will be a little warmer. We're at 62 already here east of Stark, that rural area. Hadn't dropped too much here since they've been on, half a degree or something, but below average for those lows. But then during the afternoon, it's drier air, so it's it's shifting more. So that's why we're actually above average for some of these highs, because when there's not as much moisture around, things have a bigger temperature contrast, things can change quicker. I know you can really see it on the water vapor Monday morning, some of that dry air on that in toward its upper levels. As I was looking at that, you don't really see it as much now. So I won't pull it up. I just looked at it just to double check. But I really saw Monday morning. That's why we were even cooler. 54 here east of Stark Monday morning, which was remarkable. Set some record lows even in some of these areas that have those, records over the decades. But or that data track for so long, you can basically have a record. Definitely was noteworthy fun to deal with, according with the forecast models that even gave, even though it was already, a situation where we're expecting fairly cool. But you see these highs though, getting down there a little, but toward like Sunday, more cloud cover, maybe a storm even toward that game. Jacksonville hosting Houston at 1 o'clock on CBS and the NFL. That game, downstate higher rain chances for the Gators. I know, they're going to probably have to pretty much win out to go to the college football playoff. They might be able to afford to lose one more. The way they played, they don't look like they're going to maybe even make a bowl game, to be quite honest. But we shall see. But if they, could, win all but like one more of their game, they'd probably still be able to get to the playoff with as tough of the schedule as they have. I mean, they could maybe even get to the 8-4, 9-4, whatever. With that, I mean, they might be able to get to it in that regard. But it's not looking very promising for UF this year in terms of football. It's kind of crazy, how things shifted so quick with that, with FSU way ahead of UF now, but things can always change. I mean, in 23, it was all about FSU, and then the playoff snub happened and everything fell apart, and then UF surged up some. I mean, they beat Florida State last year, and now all of a sudden Florida's kind of sinking back down. They did have that big basketball title, though. I never can forget that. I mean, that was really impressive there for Florida. You got to give them credit for that. Todd Golden there, and Micah Hanlock and Clayton there. Walter Clayton, of course, and Thomas Houck. You kind of get the idea. So, got to give them credit for that. But again, let's go ahead. You see these highs again dropping a little with some rain like Monday. And then we see 90 and 70 for that Tuesday. So, it's pretty close. It's a little drier than average generally. But that low is starting to get right at that average, you expect for this time of year. So, but yeah, definitely seeing below average here for this Wednesday morning. That's kind of a storyline there. Let me see if there's any questions or comments for any of the viewers at home. I know it's always important to stay on top of things here as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things. Let me go ahead and just kind of look through some things here real quick. If there's anything else we need to talk about, I know there's that one system that probably developed soon in the Atlanta. Not too concerned about it with Gabrielle. We're expecting to become Gabrielle out there. So again, just continuing to give you guys the very latest here on the situation. I know I have Marcus watching on YouTube there, talking about some of the different things in football. I know Pac-12 will be back next year. They have 2 teams this year, but as I'm reading some of these questions here about college football, just kind of reading some of that. We'll be keeping an eye on, these temperatures here. It's not as humid, as what we've been seeing here. So some of these 90 numbers, they don't, they're not as hot as they look here. But once you have more humidity in there, then they start feeling that way. But in the mornings, it's been nice. I mean, again, we had 54 Monday morning, 64 averaging this morning. We're at 62 though here East of Strathmore rural and not at the beach, like we're there 71 in St. Augustine right now at 2:51 in the morning. So that's gonna go ahead and wrap it up, I think, here for tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay safe. Try to enjoy things here with the weather not looking too bad. Pretty calm still due to that coastal flood advisory award to St. John's River Basin. But some areas have started to see some drought concerns. We'll have to watch that. Got to get some rain, some spots. But it's a situation here where again, others don't really want it, but we could later, depending on if we start getting like front, which could indicate severe weather, so get in October. If we start getting something like that, then well, you worried about that, but we wouldn't have to worry about drought as much maybe. But if we don't get a lot of those rain type of scenarios with a line and moisture lows, developing, hopefully not tropical, but if we don't get a bunch of rain, we do kind of get into a period that's not all that wet at times, so we got to be a little careful. We do want to get some rain. It's always a balancing act here with weather and with weather nature and the like. Have a great night. Enjoy things. And again, we'll be back here like Thursday. Nothing to come back on here earlier. Stay safe.